Hi, welcome to my talk on loss and gain in Indo-Persian manuscripts. I'm looking at a few examples of manuscripts from North India in the 16th to 20th centuries and trying to talk about loss and gain as really two sides of the same coin through case studies of a few digitized manuscripts. So when I say gain, one of the features that I might be talking about within this manuscript culture is the making of composite codices, where several books that might have been stitched at different times were then collected together and bound in one binding. I think often we can tell at what point this happened through looking at the ownership stamps. So here we only see the ownership stamps of this particular owner, Sayyid Hussain Masih al-Din, out on one of the works. So this suggests to me that it then left his possession, came into the hands of somebody else, who then bound this prose work that was used to teach Persian, along with a few other examples of Persian poetry, and finally a Persian verb table, which suggests to me that the new owner was probably using it for instructive purposes, maybe within a teaching or a school context. Different example, I think also pedagogical. This composite codex is two works of exemplary Persian letter writing, written in different hands, but stitched together. They're both from the 19th century, but several decades apart. Here you can see that the ownership stamp is written on the last page of the first of the works in the composite codex and the first page of the next work. So this suggests to me that this owner was the one who bound them together and then maybe used his ownership stamp to indicate that they're now to be considered as one codex. I'm finding this one a little bit harder to read, to be honest. I'm not confident about what the name is, but I think you can agree that these are the same stamp. The inverse of that kind of impulse, I think, is the kind of cutting and pasting that you'll see, which I think is subtractive rather than additive. So on the left, you'll see that someone's put their ownership stamp, this one's really big because it's actually royal, on a sample of calligraphy that was made into an album after being taken out of a codex. On the right, you'll see the inverse of this, which is maybe what might have happened to such a codex when it is basically removed of all its images. And this remaining manuscript is actually in really bad shape with none of its images remaining. So what happens from the 18th and 19th century is that when these particular works begin to enter the colonial library, you'll see that there are efforts to efface the prior ownership record. So on the left, you'll see that the new owner, Alexander Kothiel, has actually deleted with a line and then a sort of ink smudge what appears to have been an ownership statement by a previous owner. The part that's legible just says the owner of this book is, and then we have the ink splodge, and Kothiel has written his own name. On the right, this is an example of a very beat up work that might actually originally have been potentially even a 16th century Iranian work that then made its way into India. It appears that someone's tried to deliberately erase 3 ownership stamps that appear on the flyleaf, along with statements of ownership that clearly had been written in several different hands. This ends up being part of this interesting process where you kind of see what I think of as original fakes, basically. So on the left, that's the same work as we showed earlier, but what's happened is that the original book appears to have been cut out and placed on a new binding that's a totally different kind of paper, actually inconsistent paper throughout, and in such a bad way as it's actually falling apart in various places. On the right-hand side, what you see is that this has been clearly created for a 20th century tourist market, these kind of fake Persian miniatures that have just been overlaid over examples of their Persian-Arabic script that were clearly lying around. They don't make any sense in context, and the insertion of the image actually makes it impossible to read and figure out what's going on. This is actually not even in Persian, it's an Arabic text on ritual purity. And I think one of these is actually a lithograph. And here you see an example of overpainting. And I think the overpainting here is clearly appealing to some kind of tourist market or colonial market that is interested in this erotic miniature here on the left. So I think the afterlives of these Indo-Persian manuscripts, once they get to the library in the colonial period, can indeed point to a sort of loss of the manuscript's previous lives. But I also think we'd be amiss to not look at various continuities with the South Asian original context of circulation. So here's an example of this composite codex that was eventually bound just in some looks to be lithograph paper that was lying around, but it's actually an Urdu manual for colonial officials, which I think dovetails quite nicely with the fact that the annotations and the verb tables show that this codex was originally used to teach people Persian. Given that I've been looking at most of these manuscripts in the digital context and only actually gotten to look at one in person so far, I also think that it's a good opportunity to discuss what is gained and what is lost within the digital platform itself. The ability to compare a lot of different digital renderings of a particular manuscript do increase the chances that an original might be constructed from a particular point, but I'm also trying to suggest, with all the different movement that's happening across these manuscripts, that the idea of an original might actually be an inappropriate one here. All right, thanks very much.